Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today's breaking news is that Ukrainian Armed Forces continue to advance into the area of Kursk, and not only that, appear to be opening two brand new fronts along the original major front that they currently have that's developing near the town of Sudzha at this moment. We were able to get news today that Ukrainian forces were crossing the area of the Belgorod border near to the village of Proxies, and we got a statement and a video today clearly showing these Ukrainian armed forces are within this village.
252 знаходиться в населеному пункту Порос, Белгородська область. Слава Україні! Слава 252 батальйону!
Героям слава!
This is a brand new border incursion, and the first of its kind conducted by the Ukrainian Armed Forces into the Belgorod Oblast. If one was to pay attention and notice the area in which this border breach has occurred, it is actually occurring fairly close to the Vovchansk front, which a lot of people are believing may be showing that the Ukrainians truly are going to be attempting an encirclement of Belgorod and Kursk and capture a large area of the Russian frontier oblasts, such as Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod. This is likely and possible, although at the moment we understand that that is only a battalion-sized force, but that battalion-sized force may just be the opening of another couple of brigades that are going to be entering this area and then trying to rapidly advance down the highways and towards areas like Tetkino and also other villages like Borisovka, possibly. But it does seem as though, once again, the Ukrainian forces have created another border breach as Russian forces from literally every part of the Ukrainian front line are racing on their way to Kursk. Now Russian command has to make a decision if this border breach is going to be serious enough to warrant multiple brigades possibly having to move into Belgorod and into this specific area to try and deal with that border incursion. We also got news that apparently the town of Tetkino, which is along the border in between Kursk and Sumy, is now also under heavy shelling as well, and we were able to get those reports today from Visegrad 24, as they stated that Ukrainian artillery has started a round of heavy shelling of the Russian town of Tetkino. It is on the border with Ukraine, but 40 kilometers west of where the Ukrainian army has launched its offensive and has made it to its deepest point, which apparently is near the area of Snagost. Are the Ukrainians about to enter the Kursk region in a second place? Or more so, the question is, are they about to invade Russia from a third front? Now we have the small front down here of Peroz, we have the Sudzha front, and now we're going to have a possible Tetkino front as well. Three independent breaches of the Russian border region that Ukrainian armed forces may be conducting, and this may be an attempt to create an incredibly wide front line, and now we're starting to see, if that is the case, a hypothetical battle plan that's evolved here that is a lot more intricate than even the original one, which was fairly complex in the first place. The first Ukrainian offensive, the one that's actually in Russia at this point in Sudzha, was made up of multiple brigades. We have heard a number in between 4 brigades to 6 brigades, maybe even 7. Some people have said 7, but that's a little bit high. But beyond that, we have heard that multiple brigades are involved in this offensive. Almost all of them are mechanized or armored brigades. It is a very heavy fighting force, and it is meant to be able to move forward and engage and destroy some of the heaviest and most well-armed Russian units, uprooting these Ukrainian forces and pushing them back across the border just due to the amount of firepower that each brigade has will be incredibly difficult and will require a lot of Russian manpower and resources to be able to even try and start chipping away at the area that Ukraine now controls within the region. This also is a three-pronged offensive, aiming on reaching the town of Rilisk, Lgov, and also Kurchatov, and possibly starting a battle on the outskirts of the town of Kursk itself. It appears that it's a fairly intricate offensive. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it. We have 3 different prongs to this one front offensive. It involves multiple brigades, a large amount of sustainment units and supply units, and it's of course still ongoing at this moment. We're even hearing rumors that more units may be joining in on this one front and continuing the advance. It's showing that this was a very, very detailed battle plan, and a well-executed one at that, considering the rapid advance of the Ukrainian forces that we've seen so far. But now we're seeing that the plan may even be more convoluted and more complex than the original just Sudzha offensive, where they crossed the border and then they began their offensive in 3 directions. Now we're seeing that there may be the opening of a second offensive front, a second breach within this larger offensive, and we might end up having to call this, instead of the Battle of Kursk, this might just be the Battle of the Frontier, as this seems like Ukraine is starting to fight along the entirety of the Russian frontier, in between Belgorod Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk, possibly, although we don't really know a lot of any combat activities happening up near the Bryansk Oblast at this moment. We have heard of occasional shelling here and there around Belaya Borovska, but we haven't heard of any actual border incursions yet. However, we are going to assume at this point that these may be parts of a larger battle plan or the openings of more Ukrainian brigades possibly flowing across the border and trying to make their way towards major highways and major cities. This is also starting to cement the idea in our minds on our analysis end that this may actually be a much larger attempt, and instead of conducting a large temporary border incursion, this may be a large permanent incursion into Russian territory where they attempt to hold as much ground as they can until they can eventually get into a diplomatic negotiation and then trade land for land. Ukraine gets back their land, Russia gets back theirs as well, and everyone ends up being happy, but no one really gets anything out of the war rather than their original borders. But nevertheless, this is a very interesting occurrence, and it seems as though the Ukrainian Armed Forces have a far larger battle plan than the already monumental one that we're seeing up at Sudza. Meanwhile, up in the Sudza area, we did get to see that the Ukrainian forces are not only high-end, they're using some fairly high-end equipment. We actually got to see a Ukrainian Tunguska. I cannot state enough how rare a Ukrainian Tunguska is. You very rarely ever see one in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. There's only about 39 of these things in the entire Ukrainian army, made of about 900,000 to a million people at this point. There's only 39 of these Tunguskas, and the fact that one of them is inside of Kursk is showing that they're pulling out the fine china as far as their armed forces are concerned, and they're using some of the best available equipment that they have at their disposal. Not only in the ground forces, such as the Stryker APCs or the infantry fighting vehicle, and also a couple of other vehicles that we've seen so far, they are also pulling out some fairly competent air defense as well, at least for the Ukrainian armed forces. We also got to see a BM-21 Grad. This isn't really that high-tech. This is a fairly run-of-the-mill ordeal, but this is something that is quite interesting to note. An MLRS is a largely saturation-based artillery piece. It isn't meant for precision strikes like an M777 or any other kind of a towed artillery piece. The Grad is meant for wide coverages of a pretty decent area in a quick amount of time. And the fact that they have a Grad in this area is already showing that they are expecting on engaging and hopefully breaking up Russian forces through heavy artillery support like with the MLRS. So once again, to note, it seems as though they are pulling out heavier and rarer equipment in this offensive so far to get ready to deal with the Russians and to make sure that their offensive is on as strong a footing as it possibly can be. Meanwhile, down in the area of Makhnovka, we also got to see the Ukrainian forces threw the flag down off of one of the buildings in the town. This one was captured from what we understand several days ago, but we did get to see the clip of them throwing the flag off of the building right here, and they pull the flag out and toss it right onto the ground. And then they hop down. And then they also got some additional pictures from the village as well. This is near to the area of a small church and monastery. Pretty picturesque, actually. The buildings are pretty classical looking, something that you would see from the 19th century, but nevertheless confirming that they do control Makhnovka. So that is a fairly big development as well, once again showing clear signs of control. And right now we understand that the Ukrainians control Makhnovka, Kurilovka, Guevo, and also Plakovo as well, south and east of the city of Sudza. Meanwhile, in the Russian areas near Kursk that are still controlled by the Russian armed forces, we did see that the Russians are starting to set up refugee camps within the city of Kursk, and we can see them setting those up right here on clip. The Russian Federation has had a very hard time dealing with this offensive. There are hardly any Russian forces that are available in the area to give the Ukrainian armed forces any sort of meaningful resistance. And not only that, at this point, we're hearing that around 76,000 Russian citizens have ended up becoming refugees so far in the evacuations that are being conducted from the area. This camp is probably a very small attempt to plug the massive gap that is pretty much sinking the Russian boat of trying to get refugees into some form of shelter. This camp can only hold or house most likely 1,000 people or less than that, and there are currently 76,000 people that they have to find some form of shelter for before the colder months start to arrive. And the colder months for Russia are very soon. They're going to be around the late time of September, which gives them about a month and a half to try and prepare proper shelter for all of these refugees that are now traveling away from the active war zone. But that's the end of the clip right there, and we were also able to confirm with a secondary bit of news, which I kind of just touched on a moment ago, that the Russian Federation is stating that around 76,000 people have been evacuated from the Kursk region due to the offensive by Ukraine into the oblast. That is according to Russian state media. Trying to deal with these amounts of refugees is going to be incredibly difficult, as 76,000 refugees from Kursk is equivalent to the entire population of Bakhmut picking up overnight and leaving the town in a single day. Many people may remember it was actually a couple of weeks back in the day when Bakhmut was being evacuated for the Ukrainians to be able to pick up all these folks and transport them out somewhere and then find them some sort of shelter or some sort of a place to stay. It took about 3 weeks to do that. The Russians have had 76,000 refugees pop up in about 3 days. This is going to be pretty much impossible for them to deal with in any kind of a meaningful way that will be quick and efficient, and so there will be a lot of friction and a lot of anger by the Russian citizenry because they're going to be dealing with incredibly bad conditions. They may be sleeping out of their cars, or they may have nowhere to sleep at all. They may end up sleeping in bus stations, under bridges, near train stations, or anything like that within the city of Kursk or wherever they were ending up until they can find some form of shelter. And the Russian government may end up just giving them the short end of the stick and then just booting them out and telling them you can't stay anywhere but here, and then these folks end up becoming homeless for the large part because the Russian government will not take care of them or provide for them. But nevertheless, it does seem as though that while the Russians are also dealing with a military crisis of having really no usable forces within the border region, they're now dealing with a humanitarian crisis as well. It seems as though the tables have largely turned for the Russian Federation, at least in that instant. But moving on from that and down into the area of the Middle East, we have also been able to hear that there has been a heavy barrage in northern Israel, but apparently, interestingly enough, the actual direction of the attack is unknown, at least according to Israeli sources that we were able to get at the moment. The thing about that, though, is that this area is in northern Israel, and I'm going to be showing you all the area where most of these attacks were centralized. They are all centralized around the area of the town of Ramat Naftali. This is something that tells us that the attack was most likely launched directly across the border and inside of southern Lebanon, probably around the area of Kunin or Barashit, if that's how it's pronounced. I'm not really good with the pronunciations of Middle Eastern town names, but nevertheless, that's most likely where these rockets were fired. They're very similar to Qassam rockets that would be fired by Hamas, and for that reason, the Israeli Defense Forces are probably going to triangulate the positions of fire, which are probably close to this area, and they're going to begin to bomb the hell out of it, like they should. But this is something that once again is showing that the tensions haven't really died down. We're still hearing that Western countries are preparing for an Iranian attack against Israel. At this point, we're hearing literally everything in between. That's why we're not really reporting on this too much, because I've heard that apparently the Israelis and the Iranians are going to make a treaty, or at least the Israelis are going to make a treaty with the Iranian proxies that is being pushed by the United States. I'm also hearing statements that the United States and everyone in the world is preparing for the Iranian invasion, and it could be coming over this weekend. I'm hearing that the Israelis are going to conduct a preemptive strike. We are hearing literally every single story. And so at this moment, the information is becoming so unclear and so muddled, it's really hard to get a proper analysis and a proper standing on what's happening in this area based off of the news that we're gathering. And so we don't want to throw out any sort of unintelligent or incorrect statements here on this channel about what's happening down there until we can get a much clearer picture. Either an attack is not going to happen at this point, which I still feel is a little unlikely, or an attack is going to happen. And the first attacks will be conducted by the proxy forces of Iran inside of southern Lebanon and also within the Gaza Strip. And also within the West Bank as well, just to bring that up. But still, with that, that is all of the news we have of the Middle East, and that's also all of the news we have from Ukraine as well. I got to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching, and if y'all did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. I have to give a massive shout out to all of our patrons who are currently there right now supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all who enjoyed this channel and wanted to support it and help us to do this as a job, we wouldn't be able to make short war summaries like this possible every single day, and we also would not be able to really run this channel for the large part as well. But still, a huge thanks to all of y'all once again for watching, and I will see y'all all in the next one.